Tobey Maguire's childhood was nothing like the Hollywood fairy tale where parents whisk their kid off to Los Angeles. He nails an audition in a week and signs a contract to play Spider-Man. Nope. For little Tobey, things were much more down to earth. Santa Monica, blazing sun, skateboard-scraped sidewalks, a mum who worked as a secretary typist, and a dad who sometimes cooked in restaurants, sometimes worked in construction. The family fit the classic Hollywood description: slightly unstable. They got married when Tobey was 2 years old, and just as quickly got divorced. Even as a child, he learned that a nomadic life wasn't just about Instagram-worthy travels. It also meant half-packed suitcases and constant moves between relatives' houses. Family vacations? Forget it. Tobey's tour was living with his mom, then his dad, then grandma, then his mum's new boyfriend. Sometimes it felt like a hockey team rotation. Just when you got used to one situation, swap. But strangely enough, that chaos made Tobey a very adaptable person. Not in the yoga sense, but in the sense of being able to adjust to any situation and any crowd. Originally, Tobey had no plans to be an actor. He saw himself as a future culinary magnate, maybe the next Gordon Ramsay, just without the swearing, at least in childhood. He loved standing in the kitchen, mixing ingredients, experimenting with odd combinations, and proudly calling it a recipe. He even wanted to go to a culinary program in school to train professionally. But then his mum stepped in. A woman with a dream. She had once wanted to be an actress herself, but Hollywood had never called her name. Now the chance was with her son. She played her first and probably most important role, the role of mom manager. Legend has it that to lure Tobey into acting classes, she promised him $100. For their budget, this was practically an all-in investment into a startup. And you know what? That startup actually paid off. Not immediately, of course, but after a series of commercials, photo shoots, and funny auditions, where he had to smile so wide his cheeks hurt. Among Tobey's first star appearances was a McDonald's ad, where he was basically selling fries and burgers, little knowing that 2 decades later he'd be selling emotions to audiences worth billions at the box office. In school, Tobey wasn't exactly the star student. In fact, quite the opposite. He quickly figured out that formulas and dates weren't going to be his main tools for survival. When at 13 he got a real shot at pursuing acting full-time, he told his teachers, "Thanks for everything," and shut the textbooks. He didn't get his high school diploma until he was 25, by which time he already had a solid career and, possibly, a closet full of Spider-Man suits. What's interesting is that while many future Hollywood stars took acting classes, just in case, for Tobey those classes became a ticket to an entirely different world. He started appearing in TV shows and low-budget films, and casting directors slowly but surely began to remember his face. A childhood without a stable home teaches you to value every chance to grab hold of something, and Tobey grabbed on tight. You could say Tobey Maguire grew up in constant negotiations with reality. On one hand, he was just a regular kid who wanted to fry eggs and live a quiet life. On the other hand, he was a teenager who already understood that Hollywood was a lottery, and to win, you at least had to buy a ticket. His mum bought that ticket for him, under the pretext of some easy cash for acting lessons. There's a certain irony in the fact that the future Spider-Man was far from a superhero as a kid. He was a boy who learned to live in other people's homes, to meet new people every couple of months, and to understand that stability meant at least keeping your toothbrush with you at all times. Maybe that's exactly what helped him later play Peter Parker so convincingly, a guy whose life is a constant mess, yet still finds the strength to climb out the window and save the day. Of course, before the whole world knew him under the mask, there was a long road of commercials, bit parts, and auditions where people told him, "Thanks, but you're not what we're looking for." And every time, he tried again. Probably because, after all those childhood base changes, He knew there was no point in sulking. You just pack your bag and move forward. In the end, Tobey Maguire's childhood was a mix of fast food, suitcases, and acting ambitions he didn't even have at first. It's the story of a boy who dreamed of a chef's jacket and a tall white hat, but ended up wearing a red and blue suit and becoming the symbol of an entire generation. And it all happened thanks to his mum's clever plan and a promised $100. Believe it or not, that single bill might have been the very first investment in a superhero franchise worth billions. That's the magic of Hollywood. It all starts with a broken family, an unsettled life, and a random choice of after-school activity. And it ends with premieres, autographs, and being forever associated with the guy who made the whole world believe that the kid next door could be a hero. When we hear the name Tobey Maguire today, the image that instantly pops into our heads is a guy in a tight red and blue suit, swinging between skyscrapers, saving New York, and at the same time, Kirsten Dunst from The Rain and Boredom. But few people remember that this man might not have been leaping on webs at all. Instead, he could have been frying omelettes and drizzling them with a sauce of his own creation. Yes, the first Spider-Man of Hollywood almost became the first chef of Santa Monica. The story began simply. Little Tobey, long before anyone taught him to pretend to be a superhero, dreamed of a much more down-to-earth superpower, the ability to cook delicious food. His idol wasn't Bruce Lee or Arnold Schwarzenegger, but his own father, who worked as a cook. Young Maguire would watch in awe as his dad deftly handled knives, skillets, and pots, and was convinced this was real magic. No spiders, no radiation, no mutated villains, just salt, pepper, and the perfect sear. So when the time came to choose a subject focus at school, Tobey went all in. No theatre, no acting classes, just home economics. Courses where you learn to cook, bake, clean, and maybe even taste your own culinary masterpieces. Everything a person needs if they see their future behind a stove, not in front of a camera. But then his mother Wendy entered the story, a woman with a dream that had crashed into the hard wall of reality. Once upon a time, she too had wanted to be an actress, but instead of Hollywood, she got rent bills and a secretary's desk. And now, in front of her, sat a son who was voluntarily walking into culinary school instead of a theatre program. To Wendy, that sounded about as absurd as Peter Parker deciding to become an accountant. Gentle persuasion didn't work. Tobey stood firm. I'm going to be a cook like Dad. So Wendy made a move that would end up changing her son's life. She offered him a deal. One simple condition. Choose the theatre class, and you get $100. $100 in the late 80s for the Maguire family was like winning the lottery. For a teenager, it was a fortune. You could buy sneakers, video games, or spend it all on sweets and comic books. Though, fun fact, he hadn't read Spider-Man yet. Tobey didn't think long. Theatre. Sure, it's only for a year. Money, right here, right now. Deal. The irony of fate is that this year of theatre was the beginning of the end for his culinary ambitions. Within a few months, he got hooked on acting, started performing in school plays, then commercials, and from there, it snowballed. The chef's hat remained only in dreams, replaced by a superhero costume. If you think about it, Hollywood owes its version of Spider-Man to one simple $100 bill. Without his mother's cunning move, we might have seen Tobey Maguire not on red carpets, but in the kitchen of a trendy restaurant, cooking his signature scrambled eggs for regulars. So next time you rewatch his acrobatic stunts in the movie, remember, it all happened thanks to the tastiest bribe in history. Imagine a Hollywood star whose resume proudly lists Spider-Man, but whose education section stayed blank until the age of 25. Yes, Tobey Maguire isn't just an example of a guy who made it without college. He decided that even a high school diploma could wait. Oh, about 12 years. It all started innocently enough. Teenage Tobey was already in the acting game. Commercials, small parts, endless auditions. School? Sure, it was technically there, But who needs algebra when you get a call offering to work with Robert De Niro, even if it's just in a tiny scene? 8th grade came along, and Tobey realized spending time on homework was not the most profitable business plan. He packed up his books, waved goodbye to his teachers, and dove headfirst into acting. Of course, this wasn't one of those drop out to go find yourself in Asia or become a barista situations. Tobey had a clear plan. Start making money, and as soon as possible. There wasn't much spare cash in his family, so getting paid for a couple of days on a film or commercial set felt like winning the lottery. Even if it was for a potato chip ad, the money was very real. Still, life without a diploma meant more than just freedom from tests and lectures. It also meant constantly answering the question, "So what did you graduate from?" with, nothing yet. But Tobey didn't care. He was working, earning, helping his mum, jumping into projects, and clawing his way through the competition. A diploma. I'll get around to it. And believe it or not, he did. It wasn't until the year 2000, by which time Tobey was already a recognizable face in Hollywood and could afford designer suits, that he finally took the tests and got his high school diploma. He was 25 years old. By that point, many of his peers had already finished college, gotten married, gotten divorced, and gotten married again. But Tobey, in true Hollywood style, did things his own way. First build a career, then go back for the paperwork. And yes, we have to remember his confession in an interview. During one of his first jobs, a Doritos commercial, he spent 4 days straight eating those chips on set. 4 days straight. And since then, he's barely touched them. Maybe that diet was the final push convincing him that school could wait, but acting life couldn't. Hollywood, of course, loves stories like this, the guy without formal education who made it on his own. But the truth is, Tobey had a serious motivation to climb out of poverty and help his family. And if that meant skipping a few dozen history or physics lessons, he was fine with that. Looking back now, it's pretty funny. The kid who once sold French fries on TV became a global superhero, all without a diploma. And to be honest, he spun webs much better than he ever did homework. So if you think a diploma is the ticket to success, ask Tobey Maguire. He'll tell you, I became Spider-Man before I even had a high school diploma. And yeah, it was awesome. There's a story about Tobey Maguire that could easily make it into the textbooks of actors' baptism by fire. And no, it's not about filming with Johnny Depp, falling off horses, or performing superhero stunts. It's far more mundane, but also much funnier. This is the story of his very first serious paycheck from filming a Doritos commercial. The premise was simple. A young, good-looking guy, piles of brightly colored bags of chips, and according to the script, he had to happily crunch them in front of the camera. On paper, an easy gig for a couple of days. In reality, 4 straight days of endless chewing. 4 days. Imagine, from morning until night, you're sitting under hot studio lights, inhaling the aroma of corn chips in cheese, barbecue, and other flavors clearly invented in a lab, and in every single take you have to chew with a face that says, "This is the best moment of my life." Tobey gave it his all. Smile, sparkle in the eyes, enthusiastic, But by the end of the second day, he began to realize that the road to Hollywood might not smell like expensive perfume, but like fried corn and artificial cheddar flavoring. By the 4th day, according to him, he'd reached a state where he could eat a chip without even opening his mouth. His body was just running on autopilot. After that experience, Tobey admitted, he's barely eaten Doritos since. And it's not some star diva attitude, it's just a mild form of post-traumatic stress. I mean, who wouldn't be at least a little scarred after 4 days of being filmed in close-up with a mouthful of chips? Strangely enough, though, this chip marathon turned out to be an important step in his career. First, it was a steady paycheck, which at the time felt like a fortune to a young guy with no diploma and no stable work. Second, it gave him a practical understanding that acting isn't all about show up, smile nicely, and walk away with the money. Sometimes it means eating something you can't stand and making it look like it's your favorite food on the planet. You could say this experience was like a tiny version of Hollywood for Tobey. The gloss and fun on screen, but behind the scenes, countless takes, exhaustion, strange requests from the director. Can we get a bit more joy in your eyes? And the realization that a beautiful shot often comes at the cost of a lot of effort. The irony is that Tobey's first major job permanently turned him off the very product he was advertising. Other actors might wear the clothing brand they endorse for decades or drive around in the car they got from a contract. Tobey, on the other hand, walked away from his first big ad with just one takeaway. If fate ever calls him to another gig where he has to eat, he's going to ask in advance, how many takes, and exactly what will he have to swallow? Still, it's these small, seemingly insignificant stories that shape the Tobey Maguire we know. A guy who, even back then, understood that the path to blockbusters is paved with patience, and with mountains of chips you'll never want to see again. If Hollywood gave out awards for the most enduring and unusual friendships, Tobey Maguire and Leonardo DiCaprio would almost certainly walk away with golden statuettes. These two have known each other for so many years that their relationship could easily be compared to a long-running franchise. They've had their ups, downs, scandals, shared roles, and even secrets that will probably never make it to the press. Although, who knows? The story began back in the early 90s when both were young actors running from audition to audition faster than some people now chase likes on social media. They met at a casting where each secretly hoped to snag the role from the other. But, according to DiCaprio, instead of competition there was chemistry. They simply became friends. Leo and Tobey were just two guys with big ambitions and empty wallets, exchanging phone numbers and calling each other every time they heard about a new casting. Over the years, this mutual aid network turned into a solid alliance. Leo was the first to hit real fame, thanks to Titanic, and became the face of an entire generation, while Tobey moved a little slower, but eventually skyrocketed with Spider-Man. Someone else in his position might have felt jealous or overshadowed, but Maguire didn't seem to mind. They often appeared together at events, vacationed, traveled, and sometimes even got caught up in situations that could have cost them their reputations. Take the Don's plum scandal, for example. This black-and-white film was something they shot as a favor to a director friend, for pennies, thinking it would be a small, intimate piece. Instead, the movie turned out to be so provocative and crude that both decided the public should never see it. Cue lawsuits, bans on screening it in the US and Canada, and to this day the film remains like the child no one talks about in their filmographies. But notably, even such a scandal didn't hurt their friendship. Sometimes it seems like the two have an unspoken pact to support each other and cover for each other when things get rough. Leo, for example, firmly insisted that Tobey check himself into rehab when he began drinking heavily and putting his career at risk. And to his credit, Maguire listened. Of course, like any friendship, they've had periods where their paths diverged. Leo might disappear for months filming somewhere in the jungle or on a yacht, while Tobey focused on his projects and family. But the moment they met again, everything fell right back into place. Hollywood is full of friendships for show, the kind that fall apart faster than an advertising contract. But with Maguire and DiCaprio, it's different. They're not just red carpet buddies, they've been through poverty, first millions, and media storms together. And it seems that this genuine, not glossy, friendship has helped them both keep their sanity in a world where fame often drives people mad. In the world of Hollywood, where special effects do half the work, there's one moment for which Tobey Maguire deserves respect, even from those who aren't exactly fans of his Peter Parker. It's that legendary scene from the first Spider-Man, where Peter catches Mary Jane's lunch tray mid-fall. Looks like a simple trick with computer graphics? Wrong. There's not a single gram of CGI in it. The story is simple. but as satisfying as those very donuts on the tray. In the script, Mary Jane slips, her lunch hurtles towards the floor, and Peter, showing off his newly acquired spider reflexes, catches everything: the tray, the food, the drinks, literally a second before disaster strikes. On screen, it's pure magic. On set, it was an hours-long marathon in which Tobey was an actor, a magician, and a man with nerves of steel all at once. Director Sam Raimi, being old school, decided, no CGI, we'll do it for real. And so began a true circus act. The tray was strapped to Tobey's hand, assistants carefully arranged the food down to the millimeter, and take after take it would tumble down. Maguire had to catch it all in one smooth motion, without dropping a single item, all while keeping a look of mild surprise on his face, not sheer terror at the juice about to spill everywhere. How long did it take? Officially, about 156 takes. In the actor's own words, an eternity. He stood in one place for hours, battling not only physics but his own fatigue. Imagine it. You're a Hollywood star, and your main job today is to keep a sandwich and an apple from escaping. But persistence paid off. When they finally nailed it, the scene went down in history as one of the coolest moments in the film, precisely because it was real. No green screens, no digital tricks, just Tobey, his coordination, and a mountain of patience. Interestingly, this scene became something of a symbol for Maguire's entire approach to the role. He was ready to endure any discomfort for authenticity. Months of rock climbing training? No problem. Learning to move like a spider? Why not? Dealing with webbing on his face and a suit you can't get out of without a small army of costume assistants? You get used to it. The irony is that for the audience, this scene looks like it took only a couple of minutes and required minimal effort from the actor. No one in the general public thinks about the fact that, behind the scenes, the actor basically went through a special forces-level coordination course. And that's exactly the kind of detail that makes superhero movies truly come alive. We've grown used to everything in blockbusters being rendered on a computer, and we've forgotten how amazing real, physical action looks. Without even meaning to, Tobey Maguire became a defender of the old-school approach to filmmaking, where the actor really does what the audience sees, instead of just pretending to do it. So next time you rewatch Spider-Man, remember, that tray in Peter Parker's hands isn't the result of the magic of digital artists. It's the product of human stubbornness and 156 attempts to prove that even in Hollywood, you can catch a falling apple the honest way. There are some things that are hard to admit out loud, especially if you're the leading man in one of the most popular comic book franchises of all time. But Tobey Maguire never seemed afraid to shock the public with a little honesty. Because yes, here's the bombshell, the man who played Spider-Man had never read a single Spider-Man comic before filming. In Hollywood, that sounds almost like blasphemy. Imagine the fans who had spent years collecting Marvel issues, knowing everything about Peter Parker, able to quote dialogue by heart, and argue endlessly about who's stronger, him or Iron Man. And then picture the guy walking into the audition who doesn't even know what his character's original costume looks like. But that's where it gets interesting. Maguire didn't come to the role as a fan. He came as a professional actor who was hooked by the script. He opened the pages and didn't see a hero in tights. He saw a story about an ordinary young man who suddenly gets superpowers along with a heap of personal problems. For Tobey, this was a film about a person, not a spider. And maybe that's exactly why his Peter Parker felt so alive. He wasn't copying panels from comic books, he was building the character from scratch, through his own perspective. Of course, comic book purists might be outraged. How could he not know the sacred details of the canon? But honestly, there's an upside to that. Maguire came in with no preconceived notions. He wasn't bogged down in fan theories. He just played a guy trying to survive high school, take care of Aunt May, and somehow save the city in between. Besides, Sam Raimi's script had already adapted the storyline for film, not for deep-dive fan debates. The director knew he needed an actor who could convincingly be both an awkward nerd and a superhero without turning it into a parody. Maguire fit that bill perfectly. To be fair, once he was cast, Tobey did have to get familiar with Spider-Man's world, but in a very practical way. He trained in climbing, learned to move like a spider, and even studied real insects in a lab to understand their behavior. So you could say he filled in the gaps in his education, but through physics and biology rather than comic book lore. And here's the irony. Millions of viewers around the world thought they were watching the most devoted Spider-Man fan on the planet, when in reality they were watching a man who entered the project as a blank slate. And maybe that's exactly why the movie became a hit. He wasn't trying to be perfect according to the canon, he was being genuine. So yes, sometimes not knowing is a strength, especially if you can turn the lack of a fan background into a fresh take on an iconic hero. And Tobey Maguire, without even realizing it, proved that Spider-Man doesn't have to be someone who grew up on the comics. He can also be someone who simply knows how to play the truth. In Hollywood, everyone loves a good scandal, especially if it involves big names, million-dollar friendships, and a sprinkle of legal drama. The story of the film Don's Plum is exactly that kind of case. Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire, two young actors who at the time were still climbing their way to the top, decided to help out a director friend. No flashy budgets, no red carpets, no studio contracts, just a black-and-white film shot for peanuts, with a couple of cameras and a whole lot of improvisation. The plot was as simple as a conversation in a diner. A group of 20-somethings hang out at a Los Angeles Greasy Spoon, drink coffee, flirt, and share some questionable life advice. The plan was to make a short film, something intimate, almost homemade. But, as often happens, the director decided, let's make it a feature. And that's when the problems started. First, the improvisation backfired. The dialogue came out sharp, sometimes offensive, and the characters were far from model citizens. DiCaprio's character, in particular, delivered lines that included threats like throwing a bottle in a woman's face. For a young actor whose career was just taking off, this looked dangerously close to professional suicide. Tobey, of course, didn't exactly come across as a role model either, and that's putting it mildly. Second, by the time the film was finished, both actors' lives had changed. Leo, fresh off Titanic, had become the heartthrob of millions, and Tobey was on the verge of landing his own major roles. And then, looming on the horizon, was a film that could shatter their nice guy images in an instant. The solution was harsh. The movie would not be released in the United States or Canada. Lawsuits began, quickly turning into a full-blown spectacle. The studio and filmmakers wanted a release, while the actors demanded a complete ban. Eventually, the sides reached a settlement. The film could be shown only outside North America, and only with certain scenes cut or altered. Of course, the story instantly became an urban legend. Some said DiCaprio and Maguire were simply afraid of criticism. Others believed it was all about ambition. They wanted to control their public image down to the last millimeter. The irony is that bans always fuel curiosity. The moment people heard the film couldn't be seen, they wanted to get their hands on it. Today, Don's Plum can be found online, but legally, it's still unavailable in the US. For cinephiles, it's become a kind of forbidden fruit, the film that was too dangerous for its stars. For Tobey Maguire, the story was a lesson that even a small, friendly, low-budget project can turn into a problem of global proportions. And for everyone else, it's just another juicy chapter in the biography of an actor who managed to get caught up in a scandal before he ever put on the Spider-Man suit. And let's be honest, even without the webs, stories like this can stick just as well. In Hollywood, there are always a few stars who love risk and thrill. But while some limit themselves to buying flashy cars or outrageous mansions, Tobey Maguire chose a much more dangerous hobby: poker. And not just some friendly evening with chips, this time the potato kind, not Doritos, but real underground games where billionaires, bankers, and other high rollers sat at the table, people for whom losing $100,000 was considered an unpleasant inconvenience. The story began around 2004. By that point, Tobey was already a superhero for millions of viewers, but in his free time, he transformed into a real predator at the poker table. According to witnesses, Maguire played aggressively, knew how to throw opponents off their game, and was confident his brain worked faster than anyone else's. He took part in professional tournaments, won big sums, and rumors of his card exploits quickly spread through Hollywood. The loudest incident came in 2007 when Tobey appeared on Poker After Dark and, according to rumors, won around $10 million. You'd think life couldn't get better. But in the world of gambling, luck doesn't last forever. Gradually, the star began losing more often, and behind the scenes, people whispered that Maguire had become too obsessed with cards and was going home with empty pockets. The climax came in 2011, when the actor was sued. It turned out that several years earlier, he had won a large sum from a businessman who was betting with other people's money. More precisely, stolen money. Naturally, the police took an interest, and the victim's lawyers decided the one who should return the money was the person who had won it. That meant Tobey. To avoid lengthy legal battles and headlines like "Spider-Man caught in a web," Maguire agreed to a settlement. This story hit his reputation harder than any villain from the movies. Hollywood doesn't like it when actors get caught up in scandals like this, especially if they're associated with a beloved children's hero. Afterward, offers from major studios became noticeably fewer, and Tobey's career began to slowly slide downhill. Interestingly, many of his poker buddies, including other celebrities, also found themselves in similar predicaments. But Maguire became the main star of every tabloid headline. Probably because the contrast between sweet Peter Parker and a high-stakes gambler caught up in a lawsuit was just too juicy for journalists to resist. These days, the actor seems to stay away from high-stakes poker, but this chapter of his life has become a classic example of how gambling can cost you dearly, and not just in money. Because while he may have long since earned back what he lost, the shadow of the scandal still lingers. The moral is simple. Even if you're Spider-Man, remember that any game can turn into a web it's hard to escape from. In Hollywood, there are actors who are willing to do just about anything for a role. Lose weight, bulk up, shave their heads. Tobey Maguire went further. He gave up meat, dairy products, eggs, leather, fur, and anything even remotely connected to animals. And this wasn't some trendy celebrity lifestyle stunt. It was a conscious decision he made long before the word vegan became an Instagram trend. It all started back in 1992 when Tobey became a vegetarian. At the time, he said he simply felt it was the right choice for his health and his conscience. But as the years went by, in 2009 he took things to the next level, going fully vegan. From that moment on, there were no eggs, no milk, no cheese in his fridge. What's more, Maguire doesn't wear leather shoes and won't buy clothes with fur. And yes, he carried this decision into his work in film. If a script calls for his character to eat meat, on set he's given plant-based substitutes. The audience would never guess that the juicy steak on screen is made from tofu and spices. In Hollywood, that's actually rare. Many actors will temporarily compromise their personal beliefs for a role, but Tobey is clearly one of those who stick in Hollywood. Rumors spread faster than fresh TikTok memes, and sometimes a single photo is enough to set off a full-blown storm of commentary. Recently, Tobey Maguire found himself right in the middle of such a whirlwind. Photos surfaced of him in the company of 20-year-old model Lily Chi. At first glance, nothing special, an adult man and a young woman near a car. But for the internet's amateur detectives, that was more than enough to construct a whole romance, throw in a couple of secret meetings, and generously season the story with shock and exclusive headlines. The photos, as always, were taken at the perfect moment, when Tobey was helping Lily get to her car. That's it, just that. He opened the door for her. But in the eyes of the tabloid press, he might as well have been handing her the keys to his heart. Social media, predictably, exploded. Half the commenters immediately started calculating the age gap, while the other half was busy figuring out how old Peter Parker actually is these days. And here enters Tobey's ex-wife, Jennifer Meyer. In the best traditions of amicable divorces, or simply people who are tired of reading nonsense online, she declared, "He was just helping her get to her car. No hints, no jabs, just a fact." But who in Hollywood likes plain facts? Exactly, nobody. It's far more exciting to imagine secret romances and hidden feelings, especially when the man in question once swung through New York in red and blue spandex. If you think about it, everything about this situation is perfect. First, Lily Chi is a model and actress who most likely knows the value of attention toward her persona. Second, Tobey Maguire is a man who has seen it all in his career, from million-dollar paychecks to headlines like "Peter Parker snaps at paparazzi." And third, this is Hollywood, where simple politeness is automatically translated into the language of hot romance. The funniest part is that this entire story could have ended the moment Meyer's comment was published. But no, for the tabloids that was just gasoline on the fire. If even the ex-wife is stepping in to defend him, then it must be serious. And if it's serious, then it's time to dig up a photo where they're both smiling and caption it, "Loving gazes you just can't hide." And of course, this is the eternal cycle. A celebrity steps outside. Click! There's a photo. Click! The speculation starts. Then the Instagram body language experts swoop in, ready to deliver a verdict on the depth of the relationship based on a tilt of the head or the position of a hand. To his credit, Tobey didn't comment on this mini-scandal at all. Not in interviews, not on social media. And perhaps that's what irritates the scandal hunters the most, because a star's silence leaves unlimited room for the wildest theories. If he had simply said, "Guys, I was opening the car door, calm down," half the headlines would have died that very day. But in Hollywood, that's apparently not how the game is played. Of course, you can't ignore one more factor: the age gap. For tabloids, this is prime material. It's the perfect cliché, an older actor and a young model. Even if there's absolutely nothing between them beyond a fleeting scene near a car, that's enough to conjure up a story of mature passion and youthful beauty. And here's the real irony. Tobey Maguire, who once rescued women from falling balconies and monsters on screen, got caught in real life doing nothing more than offering a hand to help someone into a car. This isn't even tabloid-level romance of the century. It's more like a plot for a meme. In the end, as so often happens, the scandal fizzled out as quickly as it began. But of course, the internet remembered. The memes stayed, the jokes stayed, and the photos will likely keep popping up in Tobey and that model compilations. And who knows, maybe in a couple of years someone will dig them up again, slap on the caption "new pictures," and the whole cycle will start over. For now, one thing is clear. In Hollywood, you don't need to cause drunken brawls or trash hotel rooms to make the news. Sometimes it's enough just to be polite and help a young woman to her car. The rest, the journalists will happily invent for you. As to his principles, his longtime friend Leonardo DiCaprio, well known for his passion for environmentalism and protecting nature, no doubt gave him a standing ovation. The two already loved to philosophize about life, and now they had one more topic to discuss: how to save the planet without giving up good food. Of course, the press always has its own take on such things. Some admire him, saying, "Here's a man who actually lives by his convictions instead of just signing petitions." Others chuckle, remembering that in his younger days, Tobey had no problem eating Doritos by the handful for a commercial. But if you think about it, it's exactly these turnarounds that make a person interesting. Who would have guessed that the guy once fed chips on set would become a symbol of conscious eating? The irony is that in Hollywood, With its endless galas, banquets, and buffet tables, being vegan is no small challenge. Actors spend hours at events where the most they can eat is a couple of lettuce leaves and a few cherries from a cocktail. But Maguire doesn't complain. On the contrary, in an interview he once remarked that this lifestyle helps him stay in shape and keep his energy up for work. And if you remember how hard it is to maintain peak physical condition for superhero roles, the decision makes even more sense. Some need hours in the gym, others just need the right breakfast of quinoa and avocado. So looking at Tobey today, you can say this. Not only did he spin his webs honestly, without extra CGI, but he's built his lifestyle in a way he can be proud of. And in a world where every other environmentalist flies on a private jet, that's already a kind of superpower. In Hollywood, there are plenty of people who will happily step onto the red carpet in an outfit that could cost as much as a small house. But Tobey Maguire definitely isn't one of them. For him, clothing isn't an opportunity to make a splash or land on the best dressed of the week list. It's simply a tool to make sure he can sit, stand, and preferably breathe comfortably. Think about those endless premieres and award shows, the glitter, the sequins, the designer suits in which you can't bend over or take an extra step without risking a wardrobe malfunction. And somewhere among all that glamour walks Tobey. In a simple jacket, no unnecessary frills, looking as if he's just stepped out of a cafe where he had a quinoa salad. Vegan, of course. He's never chased fashion trends or tried to get on a magazine cover just to show off a new outfit. It's said that Maguire has an unspoken rule. If something is uncomfortable, it won't make it into his wardrobe, even if it's made by the god of fashion himself. Apparently, after all those hours spent in the skin-tight Spider-Man suit, he decided that in everyday life he'd only wear things that don't require 3 assistants to help zip them up. This, by the way, is another thing that sets Tobey apart from the typical Hollywood actor. He's never tried to turn his life into a never-ending fashion show. Even when paparazzi catch him on the streets of Los Angeles, he's usually in jeans and a t-shirt that look like they've been through the wash 100 times. And no, this isn't some carefully curated casual disguise put together by a stylist. It's a genuine lack of interest in glossy fashion games. Of course, the press never misses a chance to poke fun at his boring style. But honestly, that so-called boredom is one of the signs that Maguire has long since figured out that clothes won't make him a better actor, won't save him from scandals, and won't win back lost roles. Comfort, on the other hand, can absolutely save his mood. The irony is that in a world where some people wear designer outfits just to grab a coffee, Tobey manages to look as though he couldn't care less about any of it. And that actually makes him stand out even more. His photos in relaxed, unfussy looks have long since become a small meme among fans. Tobey looking once again like he's headed to meet friends, not to a movie premiere. You could say his attitude toward clothes is the same as his approach to life. No unnecessary fuss, maximum practicality, and personal comfort as the top priority. Maybe that's why he's still that guy next door audiences remember so well from his days as Peter Parker. So if fashion magazines ever decide to create a section called Hollywood Anti-Fashion, Maguire would definitely earn an honorary place there. And knowing him, he'd show up to the shoot in his favorite old jeans, simply because they're comfortable. In Hollywood, superhero salaries vary. Some get $1 million for saving the world, others get the moral satisfaction and maybe a couple hundred likes on Instagram. But in 2002, Tobey Maguire managed to sign a deal that would make any other Peter Parker a little jealous. For the very first Spider-Man, he received, drumroll please, $4 million. Yes, that's 4 zeros with another 3 in front, just for putting on a red and blue suit and convincing the whole world he could crawl up walls. At the time, this wasn't just a decent paycheck, it was a ticket into Hollywood's elite club, especially for a guy who, just a couple of years earlier, had been catching sandwiches on cafeteria trays and arguing with his mum about whether or not to join a drama class. And now, There he was, sitting in a makeup chair while his bank account was getting a deposit big enough to buy a luxury home in Beverly Hills, or a very large one somewhere in Iowa. Naturally, the public and the press started speculating right away. What would Tobey spend his millions on? A new house? A fleet of cars? Maybe a personal trampoline to practice jumping like a spider without leaving the yard? But Maguire is not your typical Hollywood spender. He's not the kind of guy to immediately go on a Rodeo Drive shopping spree. In fact, by Hollywood standards, he's pretty low-key. However, there's one detail. When you have a multi-million-dollar contract in your hands, you suddenly find yourself surrounded by people who are very eager to help you invest wisely. And every actor has their own story. Some put their money into restaurants and shut them down within a year, others into film production, later explaining it was an art house vision, not a flop. Tobey, as we now know, eventually started putting money into poker. And while playing Peter Parker brought him millions, poker brought him at least a few tabloid headlines and a couple of lawsuits. But let's go back to 2002. The first Spider-Man was a game changer. Maguire fit the role perfectly. A slightly awkward nerd in everyday life, and a hero in a mask when the situation called for it. The film crushed the box office, critics applauded, fans bought out the posters. And at the center of it all was Tobey. It was then that he realized his name had become a brand. And thanks to that brand, his paycheck for the next films in the franchise grew to sums that could buy not just one mansion, but an entire street. Still, that first $4 million check was the moment when Maguire went from promising actor to global star. Of course, rumors in the press claimed Tobey didn't immediately grasp the magnitude of the change. Allegedly, after the premiere, he could walk into a cafe in a plain t-shirt and jeans, and only from the strange looks people gave him would he realize they'd already seen him on the big screen saving New York. But he clearly enjoyed that contrast. Blockbuster superhero by day, a guy who preferred sneakers over designer shoes by night. $4 million, by the way, also comes with a certain kind of responsibility. Every journalist, every producer, every casual acquaintance suddenly starts evaluating, is he really worth that much? And to be fair, Maguire delivered. Spider-Man didn't just make its money back, it became one of the biggest films of the year and a launching point for the entire superhero cinematic universe that has since flooded theaters. As for big spending, this is where Tobey showed surprising restraint. He didn't buy himself a gold-plated Spider-Mobile or start wearing suits with diamond buttons. Most of his investments went into real estate and personal projects. Sometimes he put money into producing films, sometimes into friends' business ideas. Though, as history shows, Hollywood and business don't always mix well. Still, his story is a great example of how that first big paycheck can change everything. From a guy who once filmed a Doritos commercial for a couple of $100 and a bag of chips, he became one of the highest-paid actors of his era. And he did it without excessive showboating, without millions of Instagram followers, and without scandalous purchases like a golden toilet. Though, who knows, maybe he just didn't advertise it. Today, when you look at Maguire's career, you see that not all of his post-Spider-Man projects were smash hits, but that first $4 million contract was the starting point of his life in Hollywood's major league. Without that check, we might have only known Tobey as that guy from a couple of 90s movies, not as the iconic Peter Parker. The moral? Sometimes one good project is worth dozens of average ones. And yes, $4 million can absolutely change your life, if you're willing to stay yourself and not turn into another tabloid hero who blew it all on parties. Maguire, modest as he is, carved his name into Hollywood history the moment he got his first superhero paycheck. And honestly, that's way more cinematic than any scene with a web. When Hollywood starts to get bored, it pulls out the big guns. And in Tobey Maguire's case, that weapon wasn't a web. It was a deck of cards and an uncanny ability to read people just as masterfully as a blockbuster script. Yes, mister, With great power comes great responsibility. Decided at some point that saving New York from the Green Goblin was, of course, honorable, but far less exciting than saving his bankroll at the green felt of a poker table. According to information that surfaced in 2020, Tobey managed to win roughly $36 million over the course of 3 years. 36 million. This is not a joke and not the script for yet another Spider-Man sequel. This is real money, pulled straight from the pockets of other poker enthusiasts, not just anyone, but people who were willing to stake amounts that the average person wouldn't earn in a lifetime. How did it look? Picture private parties in luxurious Los Angeles mansions, soft lighting, champagne flowing freely, movie stars, millionaires, and business tycoons gathered around a poker table, convinced that luck was on their side tonight. And then, into the room, walks Tobey Maguire. Not in a Spider-Man suit, but in jeans and a t-shirt, wearing a look that says he already knows who's going to lose before the first hand is even dealt. His poker style quickly became the stuff of legend. Not loud or aggressive, quiet and methodical. He could sit for hours, barely touching a hand, and then suddenly jump into the game and scoop the pot, leaving everyone else wondering how he pulled it off. Rumor has it that Tobey loved bluffing so elegantly that even experienced players couldn't tell whether he was lying or holding a monster hand. Of course, such victories come with a certain reputation. Whispers went around that Maguire wasn't the most pleasant guy at the table. He reportedly demanded special treatment from dealers, nitpicked over tiny details, and, according to some witnesses, even belittled other players. But what can you do? In the high-stakes world, friendliness doesn't always go hand in hand with winning. And still, the big question remains. How did a guy who made millions wearing a superhero costume end up in exclusive poker clubs winning even more millions? The answer is simple: the thrill of the game and the opportunity to multiply his fortune. For Tobey, poker wasn't just about money, it was about control. On a movie set, the director, the writer, and the producer decide your fate. At the poker table, it's just you and your cards. Yes, $36 million in 3 years sounds like a dream. But remember, that's profit, which means the stakes were even higher. One night could bring him more than a month's salary for a decent actor, or end with a heavy loss. But Maguire clearly knew what he was doing. Not everything was glamorous, though. Tobey's poker career eventually got caught up in scandal. In 2011, his name appeared in court documents about exclusive games for the chosen few, where he played alongside other wealthy and famous individuals. Some of the losers claimed these gatherings were illegal, and that Tobey played them, let's say, a little too hard. And here's the most ironic part. Even after all that, when the press expected him to vanish from the poker scene, Maguire kept playing, just more quietly and cautiously. Publicity wasn't his goal. He liked being the man in the shadows, who wins millions while everyone else is busy debating who will play the next Batman. If you think about it, there's a kind of magic in this story. Hollywood gave Tobey fame, money, and fans, but poker gave him something else entirely: adrenaline, challenge, and the sense that everything depended solely on him. And maybe that's why he managed to stay in the game for so long without burning out, unlike so many others. Today, few remember that Tobey Maguire was one of Hollywood's most successful poker players. For most people, he'll forever be Peter Parker. But for those who've sat across the table from him, he's the guy who could take $500,000 from you without blinking. The moral here is simple. Sometimes the biggest money isn't made on a film set, but where people with deep pockets and thin nerves sit around a table. And if the rumors are true, Tobey Maguire knows how to win on both fronts, in Hollywood and in underground high-stakes poker games. And $36 million in 3 years is a result that would make even the most seasoned pros jealous. In the end, not every superhero can boast that his superpower is not spinning webs, but bluffing so well that it makes his opponent's hands shake. And in that sense, Tobey Maguire really is a Spider-Man, only instead of skyscrapers, he conquers poker capitals. In the world of Hollywood, where every other movie is marketed as based on a true story, the tale of Don's Plum isn't just a film. It's practically a cult urban legend about how friendship, ambition, and a dash of vanity can turn into a full-blown legal drama with a decades-long aftertaste. It all started innocently enough. Picture the late 90s. Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire are still young, bold, and hungry for experiments. They're not just rising stars, they're friends, hanging out together, shooting hoops, sometimes playing poker, but that's another story. And in this friendly, laid-back atmosphere, the idea pops up. Why not shoot something small and intimate, without any Hollywood pomp? A little black-and-white film, full of improvisation, jokes, goofing around, and not a single thought about box office numbers or awards. The filming went light and easy. The camera captured moments of the characters talking about nonsense, arguing over trivial things, and spilling out emotions. It was more of a creative experiment than a serious production. Everyone assumed it would end up as a short film that a few friends would watch, maybe hit a couple of festivals, and that would be it. But Hollywood loves surprises, especially when there's even the faintest whiff of money in the air. Someone on the producing side decided, what if we turn this into a feature-length film? And that's when the trouble began. When Don's Plum grew into a full-length project and got ready for release, DiCaprio and Maguire suddenly realized they didn't like it at all. Not because it was badly shot, although one could argue about that, but because, in their opinion, it revealed too much. Not plot twists, more like how they themselves appeared on screen. The improvised scenes, which had seemed funny and carefree on set, came across on film as crude, awkward, and sometimes downright unpleasant. Public image is a fragile thing. And here, right on the brink of their career takeoffs, when every role could influence their future, they were about to release a movie where they swore, argued over petty things, and generally behaved in ways far from the polished personas aiming for Oscars. The director and crew were shocked. They had a finished film, money already spent, and distribution plans in place. But the two rising Hollywood stars were ready to go to the mat. Lawyers got involved, and a full-scale battle over Don's Plum began. Accusations, counter-accusations, negotiations, threats. It was like a courtroom drama, only without the stirring soundtrack. In the end, DiCaprio and Maguire got their way. The film was officially banned from being shown in the US and Canada. Signatures, stamps, everything by the letter of the law. And here's where it gets interesting. Once something is banned, it instantly becomes 10 times more desirable. Don's Plum became an instant ghost film. You could see it in Europe, sometimes find it online, but in the States, people spoke about it in hushed tones. For fans of DiCaprio and Maguire, it became a kind of Hollywood holy grail, a mysterious film that they didn't want you to see. Naturally, the ban sparked endless speculation. Some claimed the actors were simply embarrassed by their performances and feared the film would damage their careers. Others thought it was all about conflicts with the producers over money. And there were those who saw it as pure arrogance, two young stars deciding the movie wasn't worthy of their names. The irony is, if Don's Plum had just quietly come out without all the drama, it would probably have slid past the public unnoticed and been forgotten. But thanks to the ban, the lawsuits, and the whispered gossip, it became a legend. Now it's not just an indie film, it's a symbol of how Hollywood can create its own myths. Maguire came off particularly shrewd in this story. If DiCaprio could be seen as the actor protecting his Titanic-era image, Maguire seemed determined to guard his nice guy persona right before Spider-Man hit theaters. No scenes where he could look odd or foolish, only the Peter Parker the world would fall in love with. In the end, the film stayed in a grey area. Occasionally, a curious viewer stumbles across it online. Sometimes it pops up in discussions on forums, but the official ban still stands. and every time someone tries to bring up Don's plum in an interview with Maguire or DiCaprio, there's that awkward pause hanging in the air. Everything about this story is perfect. The naive beginning, the sharp turn into ambition, and the finale where there are no real winners, but reputations remain intact. This is Hollywood in its purest form, a place where even a friendly project can turn into a battlefield, and a forbidden movie can become a cultural artifact. And honestly, looking at this scandal, you realize, sometimes the real drama happens not on screen, but behind it. And these are exactly the kinds of stories people recall decades later, with a smirk and a, "Remember when Spider-Man and Jack Dawson hid their movie from an entire country?" In Hollywood, rumors live longer than contracts, and can ruin a career much faster than a box office flop. And Tobey Maguire has one particularly persistent whisper in his file. Yes, he's talented, but working with him on set isn't always as smooth as his polished image of Peter Parker would have you believe. This story has been wrapped in gossip ever since the Spider-Man days. Back then, at the peak of his fame, it seemed like Tobey didn't even need to try. Contracts would fall into his lap like confetti at a Hollywood premiere. But behind the scenes, if you believe the whispers, things were far from festive. Colleagues weren't rushing to spill details, but one of the clearest hints came from James Franco, who worked with Maguire on all 3 Spidey films. Franco diplomatically said that working with Tobey was not easy. And in Hollywood, that's practically code for sometimes you wanted to walk off set and never come back. So what does that actually mean? Those who are closer to the behind-the-scenes kitchen whisper about perfectionism bordering on stubbornness. If Tobey didn't like something in a scene, whether it was a line, an angle, or even his co-star's facial expression, he could push for changes until the very end. For some, that's a sign of dedication to the craft. For others, it's a headache they don't want to repeat. The media, of course, didn't miss the chance to savor the topic, especially after Maguire's career seemed to slow down following Spider-Man 3. Some sources claimed he had chosen to step away from the spotlight. Others hinted that his allegedly difficult personality made directors opt for actors who were easier to work with. Hollywood, like any office, runs on a simple rule. If someone's easy to work with, they get called back. If not, well, the phone rings for someone else. What makes it all the more intriguing is the contrast between Maguire's on-screen image and the way he's described off-camera. Peter Parker is a modest, kind guy who saves everyone and never argues with Aunt May. But behind the camera, if you believe the gossip, Tobey could get into some pretty heated debates, even with the director. Not that this is unheard of. Hollywood has plenty of actors who fight for their vision on set. It's just that when your entire brand is built on being the nice guy, any deviation from that image tends to raise eyebrows. James Franco, by the way, never outright called Maguire a nightmare to work with. But the phrase, "not easy to work with," from a fellow Hollywood actor sounds a lot like, "We had our own little war, but we pretended everything was fine." And that was enough for the press to start spinning the narrative. Maybe this was why Maguire didn't get the roles he could have landed in the 2010s. Of course, it's worth remembering that in the film industry, nothing is purely black or white. Sometimes difficult simply means attentive to details. Sometimes it's a matter of temperament. Some people like 3 takes, others demand 30. But the legend of difficult Tobey has taken on a life of its own, with its own drama. The guy who conquered the world as a humble superhero turns out to be far less easygoing off-screen. We can only guess what it was really like. Maybe Tobey just hated sloppiness. Maybe he was defending his vision of the role, and colleagues mistook it for stubbornness. Or maybe there really were sparks flying on set, and not just from the lighting equipment. But one fact remains. Whispers about his not-so-simple personality still pop up in articles, interviews, and podcasts about the behind-the-scenes stories of Spider-Man. And as usual, the less Maguire himself speaks on the subject, the more room there is for speculation from journalists. In the end, this reputation has become part of his Hollywood portrait. For some, it's proof that he's a serious professional who refuses to settle for half measures. For others, it's a sign that if you want a calm and peaceful shooting day, you might want to call someone else. But let's be honest, there's a certain charm in that. Even in a world full of filtered press releases, every so often a little story surfaces that reminds us. Behind the smiles on the red carpet, there are still arguments, nerves, and human flaws. Hollywood loves stories where a superhero leaps off a skyscraper and catches a falling lady mid-air. But sometimes reality is much more mundane and funnier. In Tobey Maguire's life, there's a moment that could have easily made it into the script of a sitcom called How Peter Parker Lost His Patience. It all happened on an otherwise unremarkable day, if you don't count the fact that Tobey was being chased by a swarm of paparazzi. You know the type. These guys are willing to throw themselves under the wheels of a moving car just to get a good shot. And that day, one particularly persistent photographer apparently decided to test both Maguire's car and his patience. It all started with traffic. Tobey was behind the wheel, a friend riding shotgun, the sun blazing straight into his eyes. And up ahead, a solid wall of paparazzi. They kept darting in front of his car, clicking their shutters, seemingly convinced that the actor would stop, step out, and gift them a series of selfies. But no. Instead, Maguire suddenly burst out with the now legendary line, "Get the F! Out of the way, I can't see!" He said it with such raw frustration that even over the noise of the street you could feel it. The man had officially run out of superhero-level politeness. And you know what? The video went viral faster than a new Spider-Man trailer. Fans instantly split into two camps. Some gasped, "How could he? This is Peter Parker. He's supposed to be sweet and kind." Others, and they were the majority, took his side. Anyone would lose it if a crowd of photographers kept jumping in front of their car, blocking their view of the road. Especially when all you want to do is get home, not host an impromptu press conference at an intersection. Of course, the paparazzi acted as though they couldn't possibly understand the problem. For them, it was just doing the job, catching an emotion, stealing a moment they could later sell to the tabloids. For Maguire, it was the breaking point when a hero stops being patient and turns into an ordinary guy, slightly angry, slightly tired, and completely honest. The funniest part? This incident still pops up in every celebrities who snapped at paparazzi compilation. And honestly, it comes across more amusing than scandalous. No punches thrown, no smashed camera, just a line delivered with so much emotion that it could have been lifted straight into an 80s action cop movie. There's also a bit of satire in the whole thing. Imagine a man who spent 3 films saving New York from supervillains, swinging between skyscrapers, always finding time to smile at reporters. In real life, he couldn't even get past a wall of photographers to drive away. Pure Hollywood paradox. Look closer, and you see how this moment became a kind of permission for fans to see Tobey not just as a hero in red and blue spandex, but as a regular guy who can swear if someone's blocking his way. And honestly, that made him even more likable. Perfect people are boring. Anyone who's ever told paparazzi to get out of the way earns instant respect. You could even say this little episode is a tiny symbol of the eternal battle between celebrities and the tabloids. Paparazzi hunt for every awkward moment, and stars fight for their right to personal space. Sometimes, in that battle, victory comes in the form of a single short sentence, one that spreads online like a meme. In the end, the story wrapped up without consequences. No fines, no forced apologies on late-night talk shows. Just another reminder that behind the glossy photos on the red carpet are people who have days when they want to yell at the world, or at least a crowd with cameras. "Get out of the way, I can't see." And honestly, if someone made a short film about this moment, it would go viral instantly. It's got everything. The hero, the crowd, the conflict, and one perfectly sharp line that lives on the internet longer than most news headlines. In Hollywood, rumors spread faster than fresh TikTok memes, and sometimes a single photo is enough to set off a full-blown storm of commentary. Recently, Tobey Maguire found himself right in the middle of such a whirlwind. Photos surfaced of him in the company of 20-year-old model Lily Chi. At first glance, nothing special, an adult man and a young woman near a car. But for the internet's amateur detectives, that was more than enough to construct a whole romance, throw in a couple of secret meetings, and generously season the story with shock and exclusive headlines. The photos, as always, were taken at the perfect moment, when Tobey was helping Lily get to her car. That's it, just that. He opened the door for her. But in the eyes of the tabloid press, he might as well have been handing her the keys to his heart. Social media, predictably, exploded. Half the commenters immediately started calculating the age gap, while the other half was busy figuring out how old Peter Parker actually is these days. And here enters Tobey's ex-wife, Jennifer Meyer. In the best traditions of amicable divorces, or simply people who are tired of reading nonsense online, she declared, "He was just helping her get to a car. No hints, no jabs, just a fact." But who in Hollywood likes plain facts? Exactly, nobody. It's far more exciting to imagine secret romances and hidden feelings, especially when the man in question once swung through New York in red and blue spandex. If you think about it, everything about this situation is perfect. First, Lily Chi is a model and actress who most likely knows the value of attention toward her persona. Second, Tobey Maguire is a man who has seen it all in his career, from million-dollar paychecks to headlines like "Peter Parker snaps at paparazzi." And third, this is Hollywood, where simple politeness is automatically translated into the language of hot romance. The funniest part is that this entire story could have ended the moment Meyer's comment was published. But no, for the tabloids, that was just gasoline on the fire. If even the ex-wife is stepping in to defend him, then it must be serious. And if it's serious, then it's time to dig up a photo where they're both smiling and caption it, "Loving gazes you just can't hide." And of course, this is the eternal cycle. A celebrity steps outside. Click. There's a photo. Click. The speculation starts. Then the Instagram body language experts swoop in, ready to deliver a verdict on the depth of the relationship based on a tilt of the head or the position of a hand. To his credit, Tobey didn't comment on this mini-scandal at all. Not in interviews, not on social media. And perhaps that's what irritates the scandal hunters the most, because a star's silence leaves unlimited room for the wildest theories. If he had simply said, "Guys, I was opening the car door, calm down," half the headlines would have died that very day. But in Hollywood, that's apparently not how the game is played. Of course, you can't ignore one more factor: the age gap. For tabloids, this is prime material. It's the perfect cliché, an older actor and a young model. Even if there's absolutely nothing between them beyond a fleeting scene near a car, that's enough to conjure up a story of mature passion and youthful beauty. And here's the real irony. Tobey Maguire, who once rescued women from falling balconies and monsters on screen, got caught in real life doing nothing more than offering a hand to help someone into a car. This isn't even tabloid-level romance of the century. It's more like a plot for a meme. In the end, as so often happens, the scandal fizzled out as quickly as it began. But of course, the internet remembered. The memes stayed, the jokes stayed, and the photos will likely keep popping up in Tobey and That Model compilations. And who knows, maybe in a couple of years someone will dig them up again, slap on the caption "New Pictures," and the whole cycle will start over. For now, one thing is clear. In Hollywood, you don't need to cause drunken brawls or trash hotel rooms to make the news. Sometimes it's enough just to be polite and help a young woman to her car. The rest the journalists will happily invent for you.